Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today we are rehashing the latest Vikings loss, the shellacking that they took against the New Orleans Saints by a final of 52-33. We have a lot of things to discuss kind of as a result of that game as well. Mike Zimmer's comments, of course, have made major headlines, calling his defense the worst one he's ever had. So we'll break into that a little bit. And see kind of where else this takes us. Obviously, a pretty very defeated loss. It's not fun as a fan, and we've got one more week of football, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter for anything beyond draft positions. So we'll get into that potentially a little bit, and then we'll finish up this week here with a preview of the Lions matchup and get into off-season stuff. So that's kind of the game plan for the foreseeable future here. But for now, let's talk about what happened here. 52 points. That's the most points that I've seen the Vikings allow in a long time. Obviously, a lot has to go wrong in order for that to happen. But in this case, it only really seems like one thing went wrong, and that was Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, if you had Alvin Kamara on your fantasy team and you happen to be playing in the championship this week, I don't see a scenario in which you lost. By the way, as a side note, if you did have Kamara in your lineup and you did lose, I would like to see a screenshot of how that went down. So please find me on Twitter and show me that. But the Vikings run defense, the defensive line in general was very exposed. And I think Mike Zimmer's done an okay job of covering it up, last few weeks against inferior opponents, not Sean Payton level coaching, but it didn't take very long for Sean Payton to expose that right after it and go on the ground, and they didn't really waver from it. So, and that's the thing about this game. I think both of us coming in thought that, Drew Brees wasn't scary. I mean, we never were scared of Drew Brees. He actually wasn't that good in this game.
He wasn't. He was holding it back.
So, yeah, I mean, if they hammered Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara up the middle of the entire game, it's probably a similar scoring output, but the Vikings have fewer opportunities as well. So there's just nothing surprises me. The Vikings have some serious work to do personnel-wise, fixing the defensive line. Of course, they're going to get guys back, but, not just getting Danielle Hunter back, not just getting Michael Pierce into the game, things like that. That's not going to solve the problems. There's a clear depth issue as well, and it was very much exposed this year when, these guys are forced to play a lot of snaps.
We kind of got what we thought we were going to get, right? We talked in the pregame, this is one of the worst front sevens that you're going to find, short the guys that are missing with, Barr, Kendricks, Hunter, Pierce, et cetera, out. You have backups and backups playing in your front seven, and it was a recipe for disaster against the run. I don't think any of us foresaw 52 points or a record-breaking, or I suppose record-tying 6 touchdowns from Kamara, but I think that we all could have guessed that the run defense was going to be a problem, and the fact that you're playing against Sean Payton, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's important here. He knew what to do. They rushed the ball 45 times with a Hall of Fame quarterback. And Brees still threw for 300 yards, but I think it was pretty fair to say that by about halftime, everyone was aware that it was Kamara's show, and Brees was just kind of giving the Vikings a chance. He had 2 interceptions, too, critical ones at that gave the Vikings more opportunity than they really even should have had in this game. But 45 rushing attempts, 264 yards total for the team, 5.9-yard average. And that's including Drew Brees' 3 kneels. So yeah. This is disgusting. You can't win a game when we've talked about this before, right? In theory, passing the ball is always going to be more effective just because you're always going to average between 8, 9, 10 yards per play, as opposed to running, where even if you're great, 6 yards, you're probably not going to be efficient enough to run someone into the ground. The Saints just did that. 45 carries, averaged nearly 6 yards per attempt. They ran the Vikings into the ground. And for what it's worth, yeah, I guess Brees connected it on a couple passes when they needed to, but this was a running show, and they controlled everything about this game with just one player and having a little kind of Robin superhero to back him up in Latavius Murray. But Kamara was unstoppable. And He's not even known as a pure rusher. No. That's his 3rd 100-yard game of the season. 3rd. He doesn't even rush that much. He's more of a pass catcher. And that's what happened. It's not good.
It's not good, no. And it was kind of fitting that this is sort of how the season, the Vikings were officially eliminated, right?
Right.
That, they, I mean, the funny thing too is the Cardinals did end up losing. So like the Vikings, if they had won this game, would be, I think, a win and in or something like that potentially this week. So it's fitting, right? Because I think all season it's been, the Mike Zimmer quote. We're going to talk about Mike Zimmer's quote after this game, but the quote before the season where he goes, I've never had a bad defense, and I don't think that's going to change, or whatever he said when asked about it. And sure enough, when the most important game of the year, season on the line. Now, granted, again, that roster or that lineup out there was, I mean, half those guys are fringe NFL players, probably should be on practice squad somewhere, but elevated due to injuries, regardless. And Vikings got 52 points. Saints get whatever they want besides a couple of Breeze mistakes. It's you can't ask Kirk Cousins in the offense to keep up with that. You just can't.
That was going to be my next question because, you look at the scoreboard, 33 points, generally pretty good considering the fact that I believe the Vikings also did not have a turnover. They fumbled a couple times. They didn't lose either of them.
Yeah.
So Cousins does his job. He gives you 33 points, controls the football when he's allowed to have the football, mind you, because of what, the Saints were able to do controlling the clock. How much of the blame does go to the offense here? Like, are they responsible for 19 more points when you lose 52 to 33?
I mean, the one main critique I have, and I mean, again, there's, they had a 3-and-out, I believe, like early, like deep in their own territory, stuff like that. But like Cousins probably took a sack or two he shouldn't have. Like that happens, right? If I guess I would say that's nitpicking at that point. Like every single quarterback that's ever played is going to have a game where they take a sack or two that they shouldn't have, or they miss a wide open throw, or make a bad decision. Like nobody plays a perfect game. But I think the one thing I would criticize is just how in the heck the management of the clock was at the end of the first half when points were, I would say, there for the taking, whether it be a field goal attempt or whether it be even something more. I think maybe getting greedy to say a touchdown was possible there, but there were points there to be had, and the clock was terribly mismanaged, whether that was Kirk, whether that was Zimmer. I don't know who it was that was maybe at fault the most for that, but something needs to change. Their clock management, that happened a few times this year, where I would say end of the first half, it seemed to be the most common occurrence where the clock was just terribly mismanaged. Whether it's, you got to make a decision, got to be decisive about when to use the timeouts. It seems like the Vikings were taking time to decide if they should use a timeout, and that clock or that time ended up working against them and costing them points in this game and other times throughout the season.
I mean, if you think about it, those 3 points are, first of all, we should say this before I go on a small rant here about the Vikings 2-minute issues. There's no guarantee that they're going to get the 3 points, even if they line up for 3, just for what it's worth. Just need to put that out there because someone's thinking it because Dan Bailey's been trash, right? But you're right. They had about 30 seconds, right, to go. They needed to go about 40 yards. They didn't know what they were doing. They were completely it's not just Irv Smith. I was giving Irv Smith hell 2 weeks ago or whatever it was because he wasn't lined up correctly in a critical moment. It wasn't just Irv Smith this time. It seemed to me, and granted I'm watching on TV just like the rest of you guys, it seemed to me that Kirk Cousins was the only one that knew what was going on. That was the kind of the appearance that I had. Yeah. Whether it was a communication issue from Kirk Cousins to the rest of his team, I don't know. Maybe some fault's going to find him here, right? He's the signal caller. He's got to get his guys lined up. He's got to get everything in order. That's his job. Yeah, but okay, it seems like he was the only one that knew what was going on.
It seems like he's the only one that appeared to display a sense of urgency when it was definitely needed. Like he was the only one that was clearly frustrated with how the result of the half, what ended up happening. Because, again, you're right. This does fall on Kirk. He's the quarterback. You're in command of the offense. But something was a disconnect there, right? Like, and I think part of it too, Kirk's throwing to the middle of the field there every time, 5 yards in front of line scrimmage. That doesn't do anything either. So that part to me seems like it's on Kirk, unless the coordinators are saying, okay, if your first read's not there, throw it down the check down for 5 yards, which in that scenario doesn't help you at all because the clock needs to be stopped. So there's a bunch of different moving parts there. I'm not sure who to blame, but either way, it's bad.
They need to go back to the drawing board straight up. Like on this specific
scenario.
Scenario. Yeah. This phase of the game, they need to work on their 2-minute drill and and also their clock management. It's not just when they're driving. It's also when they're on defense. The Vikings are not good managing the clock ever. Never. They don't know how to use their timeouts. It's always, I swear to God, they always use a timeout within the first 4 minutes to start the third quarter. And I'm just sitting there like, you're going to need that. Like it's very frustrating, and it's something that you should, in theory, you'd think they could correct overnight, but apparently not, because this has gone on this isn't just this year, by the way. This has gone on for multiple years, and it's something that, it's holding you back from being a little bit better. There's some more important things here to address with this team. Most of them, I will say, should be addressed by injury returns and things of that nature. I mean, you're a lot better team when you've got Hunter and Pierce on that defensive line and Barr and Kendricks in the middle. You're considerably better. I do think the team is pieces away from being a 12-4 team again, potentially. But I do think they can compete immediately when they get all of these guys back. So I'm not super concerned about the immediate future for this team. But what they put out last week and what they're going to put out this upcoming week is not watchable from a fan standpoint. Unless you're betting on it, unless you are a diehard fan or an irresponsible fan like myself, where you're going to allow this game to affect your emotions despite knowing that it does not matter. If you're like me, you're going to watch it anyways, but you have to come to terms with the fact that the product in the field is going to be even worse than it was this week, and this was not good. They can't do anything they want defensively. Anthony Harris, by the way, looks bad. Harrison Smith looks old. Missed 2 or 3 tackles I've seen him make 100 times in his career. I don't know if this is a product of just kind of being done, in which case I wouldn't blame them. I would encourage them to, try their best. But I mean, at the same time, I don't blame any player who's frustrated and not feeling it at this point. But they look terrible on defense, just terrible. Like, stay away from the record books. Come on. I don't care if you lose, but stay away from the record books. The season's over. Let's get the high draft pick. Let's play competitively, and let's stay out of the record books. And you failed a couple of those things last week. And, I thought it was a fun game to watch, especially for Christmas. It's an exciting point-heavy game where you're trying to ignore your family. That's great, but it's also super embarrassing. And you just can't allow 6 touchdowns to the same guy. You have to find a way to not let one of those happen. Like, Sean Payton gifted you one. He had 7 in his pocket, and Sean Payton gave you one back. You can't let that happen. That's just
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's you're when you're mismanaging the clock, you're gifting your opponent an advantage when they don't deserve it. So that's what the Vikings have been doing all season. And so this is kind of a tangent, but
by all means.
So I've always wondered this, and I'd like a full analytics report, deep dive into this. But like you mentioned, those timeouts the Vikings burn always at the beginning of the second half.
Right.
Generally when that is, it's like a 3rd and 7, right? And you can't get the play call in, and it becomes a 3rd and 12 if they take the delay game, but instead they call a timeout. I'd like to know the analytics on win probability and how that changes. Instead of, if you just take the delay game, take the 5 yards, instead of taking the timeout, how much that timeout is kept valuable. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I feel like that's, and every NFL team does it, right? Where the play clock winds down, and you take a timeout to save the 5 yards when it seems like then down the road in the game, you're going to need that timeout.
Does anyone do this? Does anyone, do you know any, I know all the, I know
there's analytics out there. I know there's win probability metrics out there. I don't think they measure this specifically though, or I haven't seen anything out there. And if there is something, please let me know, listeners. This is something I'm very curious about, because I'm always, every time I see this when I'm watching football, I'm like, just take the 5 yards. Just that's fine. If it's 3rd and 2 and becomes 3rd and 7, that's fine. Just take it, save the timeout if it's a close game. But anyway, I think we should kind of mention what Zimmer said after this game.
Right. There's not a whole lot.
I mean, there's nothing else really to discuss about this game.
There's nothing to break down here.
Right. Adam Thielen's still good. Irv Smith is a stud. Justin Jefferson's still good. That, we know the offense can still hum, and we're kind of not talking about it because there's nothing new. It just was what it was. True. But then what Zimmer said after, it's kind of because I mentioned the quote before the season where he said, "I've never had a bad defense. I don't expect that to change." I think whoever, I don't know which reporter asked him. It might have been Chris Thompson after the game, but whoever it was, kudos to them, because this is kind of, you're really getting a good quote out of this. But he said, "Oh yeah, this is a bad defense. This is the worst one I've had." And then he went on to list, the guys that aren't there. And so I wanted to get your perspective on it, because he kind of then said, this is a bad defense, the worst one I've had. But then he's like, we got to get our great players back. We got to get Anthony Barr. We got to get Kendricks back. We got to get Daniel Hunter back in there, and blah, blah, blah. So it's almost like, Zimmer's never been one to say, never been a proponent of making excuses, right? That's kind of the vibe he gives off. But to me, that seems like that's what he's doing there. And I guess what I was looking for is him to just sort of take some of the blame, like shoulder some of it. Like, I got to be better coach. I got to put a better game plan together. It's kind of what I was looking for there.
So
Again, I still love Zimmer. I love the guy. I still think he's an awesome defensive coach, but that's just, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
So there are two ways to approach this type of situation, right? And I think we saw both of them last week. There is the Zimmer way, which is kind of the glancing blow, where you take it on the chin and then you just kind of let it like bounce off of you and just find a way to kind of spread it around, which is what he did. And then there's what Baker Mayfield did when the Browns lost to the Jets. And I would encourage you to watch that 2-minute rant, because if you were into the J.J. Watt one, you probably also feel good about the Mayfield one. And he essentially just took everything on himself. Despite the fact that everything around him was crumbling, he did not make any excuses for himself. He said all the right things, whether it's true or not. I tend to believe it because I think he's a pretty real genuine human being, but he said all the right things. And that's, to me, what I would have liked to have heard from Zimmer was like, yeah, we had some problems here. It's 2020 though. Like, what you're dealing with. Like, you know what you got into. The injuries suck, but like, you got to find some way to not allow 52 points. Like, I understand that Zimmer was in deep here. Like, he didn't have a whole lot to work with. There are some, really good bright spots here. I think he found 2 starting cornerbacks for next year for starters. So there are some bright spots with this defense. But what he said is kind of like what he said is, this is the worst one I've had, which that's possessive. So he is taking ownership of the fact that like, this is a bad defense and it's his. So in that way, he's not making any excuses. If he had just said that statement, like, yeah, it's a kind of matter of fact, boring statement that any one of us could have said that just carries more value because it's the head coach saying it. But at the same time, as soon as he continues that statement and he's like, we got to get Barr, Kendricks, Pierce, et cetera, back, it's like you're saying, yeah, this is the worst defense I've had, and it's these guys' fault because I didn't have.
Well, it's also like, it's not giving yourself credit too. Like, it's like disqualifying himself and his accomplishments as a coach the last 5 years, putting together a great defense, and saying, well, it was just these guys doing it, essentially, right? Like, he's taking away what he's done as Vikings defense, as the Vikings head coach, putting together awesome defenses. So I don't know. I guess, and again, I'm sure I'm not going to like put too much into this or put too much thought into this, because he's frustrated after an embarrassing loss on Christmas Day. Like, I don't think, frankly, Zimmer doesn't think too much about really what he says or doesn't say to the media. He just kind of wants to get through the media session, right? Whether it's a good day or a bad day. So I just, for me, it would have been like, that's fine. Everything he says is fine. But I think I just would have wished at the end he said something like, well, I'm the head coach of this team. Giving up 52 points is ultimately my responsibility. So, and even if it was or wasn't, like, we can as fans figure that out, I think, based on the fact that these guys are all practice squad players, but like, at least shoulder some of that responsibility, because that's what I guess the leadership would look like to me. But anyway, that's just, I think we should have mentioned that.
I think there is one more point here. I think and this kind of goes off of what you were saying about Zimmer's relationship with the media. I think what Zimmer says to the media and what Zimmer says to his players are entirely different, which is good and bad, right? Like, it's good that, he's keeping issues in-house. I think that's always like, it's better to not air your grievances to the media, which he's done this in the past, and it's not tight. Like, it's never gone over well when he's spoken poorly about a player in the media. He's done a good job for the most part of keeping what he says constructively, critically, whatever it is, to his guys. And his guys acknowledge that and seem to feel like he takes ownership. I've never seen any player say Zimmer isn't taking ownership of this issue. Or I've never seen any attitude that suggests that to be the case, with the exception to the one time when Xavier Rhodes and Terrence Newman decided to freelance. That was the one time when I thought that they kind of were against their head coach. And we've since seen, nothing else to suggest that to be the case. So I do think that, where he says it matters, because you're probably going to have a couple players be like, it's nice for you to let us know that you're owning this one for us. And I'm sure he said that to his guys, but we also want you to say it publicly because otherwise we're like, you're shaming us, it's important to say the right things privately, but you also have to be public about, important moments. And I think this might be one of them because you're done. Like you don't get to have your year-end press conference when it's supposed to happen this year. You have to have it a little bit early. And to me, the message that he was sending probably doesn't line up with the one that he said in the locker room. And I want to hear what he said in the locker room because I think that he probably placed more blame on his shoulders talking to his players than he did to us.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and I'd like to hear it because like ultimately, like, it's not really his fault. It's not really Rick Spielman's fault. It's something else's fault that you can't really. This is why we have insurance.
The injury part, right? I mean, there's
no insurance for a very important football player.
Well, we could bring up the fault of is this maybe Rick Spielman's fault for not providing the personnel necessary to withstand these injuries, right? Like that's something that should be considered.
That goes back to my favorite quote of all time. The one, I can't remember who it was that said it right now, but the one about Peyton Manning, where why is Peyton Manning taking all the snaps? And the coach responded, "If 18 goes down, we're fucked." It's my favorite quote of all time, and it stands for everyone, especially for Zimmer, who's a defensive head coach, where your signal caller, Anthony Barr, you lose him, right? And then you hand those responsibilities over to Eric Kendricks. You lose him. You've seen some regression from Harrison Smith. I don't know what the level is yet. That will be determined early next year, I'm sure. You've seen regression from Anthony Harris. The franchise tag looks like a beautiful move right now from a management perspective. To me, there's no true answer. Like, would it be nice to have gotten a 5th-round linebacker that can step in and play to the level that Anthony Barr has, which, for what it's worth, the bar is not super high, no pun intended. But, yeah, it would have been nice. But, like, can you actually be pissed off about someone like the general manager not doing that when the draft was as good as it actually was? I mean, you got 2 starting cornerbacks out of this for sure. At least going into next year, you got 2 starting cornerbacks. You got a starting wide receiver, superstar wide receiver at that. You've got a rotational defensive end that might even get a little bit better and want them. How much more can you ask? I think upper management and the coaching staff did about the best they could with this situation. And I think it just ultimately crumbled. And, 18 went down 5 different times for the Vikings this year. And here we are, 6-9, we're screwed.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, I don't know. I mean, it'll be a fun offseason though, because I do think there's a scenario where the Vikings are quickly competitive again next year.
I do too.
And that's going to require, some injury luck. I mean, and it's happened to the Vikings before. 2017 is a great example. Guys were healthy, much more healthy than the rest of the league. And I think, once if the Vikings get that next year, they'll be competitive again. They can, make another, I guess, every odd year, right? The Vikings are competitive and make a playoff run. So, but kind of seemed like a perfect storm of injuries on the defensive side just happened this year. And as long as those guys can stay healthy next year, you're going to be much better off, like you said, with those 4 guys. But this offseason will be interesting because there's still so many holes to figure out with this team. I mean, still clearly defensive line's an issue, whether or not you have Hunter and Pierce. Offensive line and getting past pro is an issue. You can always add another receiver, right? Adam Thielen is getting up there in age. Clearly having 2 receivers is a big deal, right? You can see it with Jefferson this year. Having 2 very good receivers is a big boost to your team. And of course, defensively, secondary, cornerback, linebacker now clearly behind Kendricks and Barr is probably something that needs to be figured out with Eric Wilson probably gone. So a lot of different ways to address this offseason. But I guess we do have yet one more game to look at before offseason officially is underway.
So that quote, by the way, that was Tom Moore.
He was their offensive coordinator for the Colts, right? Forever.
He was a consultant for the Colts or he was an offensive
something
coach,
like that, yeah.
Something like that. So feel free to look that one up. It's a fun one if you hear the audio version of it too. But yeah, so this is the situation the Vikings have. Clear, plain and simple. They're going into week 17 playing a meaningless game against another team that is also playing a meaningless game. This is a stat padding game. No way around it, really, other than that. Don't get hurt. Don't tear an ACL. Don't do anything like that. Get a good look at some guys that might be factors for you next year. I would like to see Wanham play a little bit more, for example. But the position that the Vikings are in right now, I don't think that this feeling is going to last that long. I think every single one of us is very disappointed in how this season has kind of unfolded and been the roller coaster that it is. And ultimately, you end on a low note as opposed to, potentially finding a way to make the playoffs, which had they beaten Chicago last week, even if they lost to the Saints, they would still be in position to be playing for a playoff spot next week. But because of the position they were in heading into this one, you got the outcome that you kind of expected. I think that none of us are super shocked by the result. It's just more of, kind of the fluff, right? The record-breaking nature of that loss. That's what sucks for me, because ultimately, like, you did yourself kind of you made the right move. You were unofficially eliminated. You lost. You got a higher pick probably because of it. And now you get to go into this week and see what you got and close out the season and start turning the page. 7-9, 6-10. You know that you're on the cusp. You know that if you get some players back, if you make a couple savvy draft moves, if you are able to sign a guard in free agency, so help me God. There are a lot of ways to fix this team quickly. It's just that there are a lot of ways. You got to figure out which one is the most correct path, which one's going to help you get there the quickest, and what's going to work with what you got right now. This doesn't just mean that you can just bring in any player and it's going to work. You can't just bring in Alex Boone because he was good a long time ago and hope that it's going to work. You got to find answers that make sense this year. Otherwise, these guys are going to be gone. I think that they earned enough to be back for next year. And speaking of Spielman and Zimmer specifically, you could also make a case for the defensive guys in Patterson and the little Zimmer. All these guys could be gone if this defense looks anything like this next year. But you have to feel good knowing that it's not just a Band-Aid coming. You're going to get the proper surgery required on this defense immediately, just in-house. And then you've got an opportunity with potentially a higher draft pick than you would have had you been a one-and-done team in the playoffs. So I'm trying to find positives here, but it is what it is. It sucks.
Yeah, I mean, this is the even year pattern for the Vikings. It's an odd year. You're competitive, make a playoff run, potentially win a playoff game. Even year, you kind of fall back to earth a little bit. Things go wrong, and then you regroup and try it again in the next odd year, which would be 2021.
I mean, we'll see what happens, but that's basically all I've got for you guys today. I don't have anything super insightful or fun or interesting. I'm as bummed out as you guys are, and I'm not looking forward to this weekend the same way that I would have had a couple more things fall in the right way for the Vikings this year. But alas, here we are, and we'll be back later on this week to give you an idea of what to look for, this isn't going to be a game that's fun competitively, but it's still Vikings football. You get it one more time for for another 6 months here, and we're going to try to enjoy that and find things about this upcoming game against Detroit that might be fun to keep an eye on, things that might develop into something bigger in the foreseeable future and so forth. So thank you as always for listening to us. Hopefully you were able to kind of grieve with us on today's episode. And later on this week, we'll get back to business and then we'll start our off-season scheduling next week. It'll be a one-show a week thing again during the off-season. We haven't decided what day yet, but I'll give you some more information on that later. So thank you guys all for listening. We appreciate it, and we will catch you guys next week.